Hello and welcome back to the Joyful Soul Creates. Today I have a video showing you some different ways to approach using your floral stamps. For example, if you don't enjoy colouring with alcohol markers or watercolours, you might want some different ideas of how to colour them. And I have 3 cards today, each showing a different approach. So for my first card, this is kind of the closest to a traditional colouring technique. I'm going to start by stamping the large flower cluster from Simon Says Stamps Beautiful Flowers onto a card base made of smoke cardstock, and I'm using Barely Beige ink, which will give a tone-on-tone look. And I'm actually stamping it several times because it's very light on the first impression and I want it a bit darker than that. I think I stamped 3 times, and I will also go and stamp it again after I've completed the colouring. So as you can see, I've positioned it just off to one side of the card base and stamped it down, and here you can see how it looks. So then I'm going to remove it from my MISTI, and I will leave the stamp in my MISTI because, as I said, I'll be wanting to stamp it again after I've finished colouring. For my colouring, I'm just going to be using one pencil. I will just be using white, and I'm going to use a Caran d'Ache, I'm not sure if that's how you say it, pencil, which gives very good coverage. So I'm concentrating on basically putting in the highlight areas. So if you think about where the highlight would be, that's where you want to put your white down. Flowers are very forgiving in this way because there's so many kind of rolls and dips. Basically you want to look for your shadow areas and consider what the opposite part would be. So anywhere where there are folds, that would be the shadow, and you want to go more on the edges and the bits that would be raised up, the bits that are in front, not the areas that are behind. And I'm holding the pencil quite far back so that I can get a light coverage of the pencil, and just going in layers. Put a light layer down first and then build the white up in the areas that I want more of a highlight. And I will just keep going across the whole of the image like this, working one flower at a time, one petal at a time, and the leaves as well. And I won't show the whole thing because, as I said, we have 3 cards to get through in this video, and it would take quite a while if I was going to show colouring on the entire card. But floral stamps are quite forgiving, and with using just the one pencil, you don't have to consider how your colour blends work and what colours would go well together. You just use the white, add your highlights, and it's as straightforward as that. You could of course do it the other way and use a darker colour. So for this particular card base, if you used a slightly darker grey and go and add in your shadows instead of your highlights, that would be another way to do it. Either way, you would get this kind of monochrome tone-on-tone look, which is very pretty. Once I'd finished all the colouring, as I said, I put my card base back into my MISTI, and as you can see, my card base is actually not all the way into the corner. So I had made a mental note when I originally stamped so that I would know how far down from the corner it was, which I think I did 1/4 of an inch, and placed it exactly in that same space to make sure that I would get the stamp lined up perfectly again for doing my repeat impression. And thankfully I managed to do it because I'd spent so long on the colouring. I would have hated to have to start over if I'd messed up. And here you can see how it looks with that contrast from stamping again. This does actually fade back a bit more and will be paler again when it dries. I think maybe Barely Beige wasn't the best colour choice for this, but I don't have a lot of inks, so it was what I went with. But for example, a grey would work nicely on this instead. Here I will just show you quickly how I finished off this card. So I added 3 lines with the white pencil, and I brought in a sentiment from a different stamp set because I didn't like any of the ones from Beautiful Flowers with this card. I decided to use With Love from Mandy's Flowers, which is also from Simon Says Stamp, and I stamped that with the Barely Beige ink. On to the second technique, and this time I'm going to be stamping the same flower cluster onto some watercolor paper, and this time I want to see the lines more obviously, so I'm going to use MFT Black Licorice Hybrid ink rather than the Barely Beige. This is my go-to black ink. It's good with water-based techniques and also with alcohol inks, so I use it for pretty much everything. and I'm going to stamp a couple of times just because of the tooth of this watercolor paper makes it not always stamp perfectly the first time, so by stamping a couple of times I can make sure I get a good impression. And then I'm going to be using the smooshing technique to colour this up. I have a little piece of acetate and I've applied my worn lipstick Distress Oxide to the acetate, spritzed it with some water which has perfect pearls in it. You could just use plain water if you prefer, and I'm using the little piece of plastic to pounce my colour and smoosh it on to the paper. And this is a slightly more controlled way of smooshing. You can do it where you put your colour directly onto your craft mat, for example, and then press the paper into it. But I wanted to have some control over where the colour went, so instead I put it on the plastic and then brought the plastic to the paper. It's still quite a loose colouring technique, and that's what I wanted. I wanted it to be loose and imperfect. After doing the worn lipstick, I'm going to go in with some wild honey to bring in a different colour and just add some more interest to those flowers. So this is more of a kind of orangey yellow, and I will use the edge of the acetate to pull the colour out as I feel necessary. So again, I'm just pouncing that on until I'm happy with it. And if there are any bits that are pooling where I don't want them to, I'll just pick that up with a kitchen towel. Some layers I dry in between so that they won't mix, and other layers I let stay wet so that they do mix. This will give me a bit of a different coloration and a bit of a different look. So here I didn't dry in between, and this allows the wild honey and the worn lipstick to mix and make a very pretty coral colour. So I will just keep going in and adding more colour and pouncing it onto the flowers until I am happy with how they look. And there will be some areas where the ink goes over the edge, goes in areas outside the floral cluster, and I think this just adds interest to the card. If you don't like this messy look, then this probably is not the right technique for you, and you might want to try one of the other techniques I show in this video. Once I'm happy with the flowers and have dried them again, I will go on to colouring the leaves with the same technique, and this time I'm going to use Cracked Pistachio and Lucky Clover. And again, I'm just pouncing on in the areas I want the green to be and spreading it as necessary with the corner or the edge of the plastic. And I started with the Cracked Pistachio and pressed that on first. I felt it was best to go in with the lighter colour first and then use the Lucky Clover, the darker colour, to add a bit of shading. And again, I'll pounce up any areas that the ink is pooling if I feel it's necessary to do so, and some layers I will dry in between so that they can layer on top of each other, and other times I will not dry because I want the colours to mix and merge a bit. And as I said, this just helps give some different tones and interest to the card. There were a couple of places that I got too much green on the flowers, so I went back in afterwards and added a little more of the worn lipstick and the wild honey just to fix those areas and bring the colour more how I wanted it to look. Once I was happy with the colouring, I trimmed that panel down and added it to a I think it's Peacock card base. I stamped a sentiment from the same stamp set onto it, and I filled in the open areas of the letters of the word beautiful with that white pencil I had used on the previous card. Here again I'm just showing what colours I used. So there's the worn lipstick, the wild honey for the flowers, and Cracked Pistachio and Lucky Clover on the leaves. As I said, I filled in the sentiment with my white pencil, and also for the smaller part of this sentiment where it says "you are so," I actually lightened up the area behind the words with the white pencil before stamping it, just to help it stand out a bit from the lines of the flowers. I used some clear iridescent glitter Love from Lizi peel-offs all around the edge of the panel just to add some sparkle and interest to the card. And then I added some Nuvo drops. I cannot remember what this colour is called, sorry. But all the products used are listed down below, so you can find that down below if you are interested. I'm going to do some paper piecing for my third and final card. So this very quick and easy colouring technique doesn't take much effort at all. I will start by stamping the cluster onto my white card base, and this time I'm doing it along the top, well, the top as the card is currently oriented, but it will be the right hand side of the card when it's finished. And I'm using that same MFT Black Licorice Hybrid ink that I had used for my watercolouring because, as I said, this is my go-to ink. You could of course position this however you wanted for any of the techniques. I just thought, as the other two had quite similar positioning, I'd do something a bit different on this third one. I then took the individual flowers from the stamp set, and these perfectly match the ones in the cluster, which is very helpful for this technique. And I'm going to stamp all three of them onto the piece of pattern paper, which is from ModaScrap's Fly and Scrap pattern paper pack. I actually got this pattern paper and also the stamp set in the June Simon Says stamp card kit, so this is actually a video showing elements from that card kit. I'm very behind on my card kits and I'm trying to catch up on them a bit, which is why I made this video with these items. So after I'd stamped the flowers, I cut them away from the main piece of paper and I'm going to fussy cut them out. It's easier if you don't have them attached together or attached to the big piece of paper because the scissors will move more smoothly when you don't have as much extra paper behind them, if that makes any sense at all. When you're fussy cutting, you want to work slowly and move your paper and not the scissors. Having good fussy cutting scissors does help, but I do not have good fussy cutting scissors, and if you're just careful, you can make any scissors work for you. Once I had them all fussy cut out, I adhered them to the card base over the coordinating flowers that I'd stamped there, and I actually used two different kinds of foam tape. I used a thinner foam tape for the two back flowers and then a slightly thicker one for the front flower so that it's more raised up but not as much more as if I had used a double layer of the original foam. I added a sentiment from the same stamp set and then I finished by adding a frame using my black Sharpie pen, which completed my third and final card. I hope you found these techniques useful. I'd like to know which of these cards you liked best. I think my favourite is possibly the third one. That was nice and quick to make and I really like how it turned out, but I do like the second one as well. If there is some other technique you'd like to see me do with floral stamps or any other video ideas you have, do let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up and let YouTube know that you'd like to see more of my content. You can also hit the subscribe button, which is on screen now, to make sure you never miss any of my future videos. There are a couple of other videos on screen that I think you might enjoy. Thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Bye!